Good afternoon. This is Kathleen Drew, Chair of the Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council, calling our January meeting to order. Ms. Grantham, will you call the roll?
Certainly. Department of Commerce,
Elizabeth Osborne, present.
Department of Ecology,
Eli Levitt, present.
Department of Fish and Wildlife,
Mike Livingston, present.
Department of Natural Resources,
Lenny Young, present.
Utilities and Transportation Commission,
Stacy Brewster, present.
for local government and optional state agencies for the Horse Heaven Project for Benton County, Ed Brost. For the Badger Mountain Project for Douglas County, Jordan Julio.
Present.
For the Watoma Solar Project for Benton County, Dave Sharp. The Washington State Department of Transportation, Paul Gonseth.
Paul Gonseth, present.
For the Hop Hill Solar Project for Benton County, Paul Crouppen.
Paul Crouppen, present.
For the Carriager Solar Project for Klickitat County, Matt Childs. Assistant Attorney Generals, John Thompson,
Present.
Jenna Slocum, Zach Packer,
Present.
Administrative Law Judges, Adam Torum, Laura Bradley, Dan Gerard, and Joni Deerfield. For council staff, Sonia Bumpus,
Present.
Amy Hofkemeyer,
Present.
Amy Moon,
Amy Moon, present.
Stu Henderson, Joan Owens,
Present.
Dave Walker,
Present.
Sonia Scavland,
Present.
Lisa Massengale, Sarah Randolph, Sean Green,
Present.
Lance Caputo, John Barnes. Oh.
Lance Caputo, present.
Thank you, Lance. John Barnes,
Present.
Joanne Snarsky,
Present.
Alex Shiley,
Present.
Allie Smith,
Allie Smith, present.
Carl Halapa,
Carl Holpa, present.
Audra Allen, Zia Ahmed,
Present.
Maria Belkina,
Present.
Lisa McLean,
Present.
Adrian Barker.
Present.
For operational updates for the Kittitas Valley Wind Project, Eric Malbardis. Wild Horse Wind Power Project. Oh,
Sorry, Eric Melbart is present.
thank you, Mr. Malbardis. For the Wild Horse Wind Power Project,
Jennifer Galbraith, present.
Grace Harbor Energy Center. Chehalis Generation Facility,
Jeremy Smith, present.
Columbia Generating Station, Columbia Solar,
Thomas Fishing, present.
and the Goose Prairie Solar.
Jacob Christ, present.
And do we have anyone present for the Council for the Environment?
Yes, Sarah Reineveld present. I'm also joined by Yuri Koral, a newly assigned Council for the Environment, who's also present.
Thank you, Ms. Reineveld. Chair,
Thank
we
you.
have a quorum for all of the councils. Thank you.
Thank you. On to our approving the meeting minutes. First of all, let's approve the proposed agenda. The proposed agenda is in front of you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Lenny
Eli
Young.
Levitt. Oh. Motion
ahead,
to
Eli.
approve.
Lenny Young, second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed? The agenda is approved. Moving on to the meeting minutes for November 29th, 2023. Meeting, the Horse Heaven special meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve the special meeting minutes?
Elizabeth Osborne, so moved.
Thank you. Second?
Stacy Brewster, second.
Thank you. The comments I have on those meeting minutes, page 30, line 18. The word iterate, I-T-E-R-A-T-E, should be iterative, I-T-E-R-A-T-I-V-E. Page 32, line 13. Tax, T-A-X, should be tax, capital T, capital A, capital C-S. Those are the two corrections that I have. Are there any other corrections? Hearing none, all those in favor of the meeting minutes as amended, please say aye.
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 Opposed? The minutes are approved. Moving on to our December 20th monthly council meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Lenny Young, so moved.
Second?
Ike Livingston, second.
Okay. The comments I have, the corrections I have for the December 20th minutes are page 12, line 12. Ms. MS should be Mr. MR. Page 15, line 6. So this one, strike from the comma after archaeology through preservation. And this should say archaeology and historic preservation. Page 48, line 6. The word let, L-E-T, should be less, L-E-S-S. Are there any other corrections? Hearing none, all those in favor of the meeting minutes as amended, please say aye.
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 Thank you. We'll move now to the operational update. Mr. Milbardis. Oh, sorry, that would be Kittitas Valley Wind Project.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew, FSEC Council and staff. For the record, this is Eric Milbardis with EDP Renewables, giving my final report for the Kittitas Valley Wind Power Project. Firstly, we had nothing non-routine to report for the period. However, I did email FSEC staff earlier, I think it was last week, that I have accepted a promotion. So there will be a management change at Kittitas Valley after 14 years. I've been here since we put the turbines in the ground, and I will be moving on to an area manager role for the company, where I will be responsible for just over a couple gigawatts of solar in Nevada, California, and Arizona. So I was going to introduce the new manager for Kittitas Valley, Jared Cassaday. However, when we rescheduled the meeting, he wasn't able to make it today. So I will fill him in, and he will be giving the KV report next month. That's all I had.
Thank you. My microphone was not responding adequately. Thank you, Eric. You have been a great partner, and we look forward to working with you in another capacity, and congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Wild Horse Operation, Power Project, Ms. Galbraith.
Yes, thank you, Chair Drew, council members and staff. This is Jennifer Galbraith with Puget Sound Energy representing the Wild Horse Wind Facility. And for the month of December, I have a couple of environmental compliance updates. The Wild Horse Technical Advisory Committee met via conference call on December 5th for the annual meeting. This was an informational meeting only. There were no items that required formal actions or recommendations from the TAC for the council's consideration. And then the second item, in accordance with the site certification agreement, the Operation Spill Prevention Control and Countermeasures Plan was updated and submitted to FSEC staff on December 18th, and there were only minor administrative updates to that plan. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for including the minutes from the TAC meeting. I appreciated reading them and keeping up with the good work that you're doing.
Great, thank you.
Chehalis Generation Facility, Mr. Smith.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew, council members and staff. This is Jeremy Smith, the operations manager representing Chehalis Generation Facility. I have nothing non-routine to note for the month of December.
Thank you. Grays Harbor Energy Center, Mr. Sharon.
Chair Drew, if I may chime in, this is Amy Hofgemeyer for the record. The update is provided by the facility in your council packets. There were no non-routine items to report.
Thank you. Columbia Solar, Mr. Cushing.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew, council members, FSEC staff. This is Thomas Cushing speaking on behalf of Columbia Solar. There are no non-routine updates.
Thank you. Columbia Generating Station and WNP 1 and 4.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew. This is Amy Moon, FSEC staff. Energy Northwest asked if I could give the update. There are no non-routine items to report as demonstrated in the council packet. Thank you.
Thank you. Goose Prairie Solar Project Update, Mr. Christ.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair Drew, FSEC council and staff. So this is Jacob Christ, Senior Project Manager on behalf of Brookfield Renewable. So for construction updates, starting with the substation. So the construction is progressing. Substation completion is expected in sometime in mid to late March. Remaining equipment and material deliveries are still being planned. Everything's still on schedule there. Pre-drilling is complete along with our medium voltage cable install. Pile driving, perimeter fence continue along with racking and module install. So the last 2 weeks work's been slowed pretty significantly with weather delays due to snow melt and rain. So it's really all hands on deck for maintaining BMPs right now throughout this period. And then we do have, as recent as today, ongoing environmental inspections by WSP also. And that's my update.
Thank you. Council members, are there any questions? Thank you for the update. Moving on to High Top and Austria project update, Ms. Hofgemeyer.
Thank you, Chair Drew. Good afternoon, Chair and Council. Again, this is Amy Hofgemeyer for the record. Staff are continuing to work on pre-construction plan review with the certificate holder. There are no further updates at this time.
Thank you. Whistling Ridge, Ms. Hofgemeyer.
Thank you. Staff continue to coordinate to work towards scheduling a public informational meeting for the requests for this project. Details will be announced once they are available.
Thank you. Badger Mountain project update, Ms. Snarsky.
Thank you, Chair Drew, and good afternoon, council members. For the record, this is Joanne Snarsky, the siting specialist for Badger Mountain Solar. Efforts continue on the development of the Supplemental Cultural Resources Survey. We have received Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation concurrence on a work plan for the initial pedestrian survey. Additionally, we recently began working with the Department of Natural Resources to obtain an access agreement for our subcontractors to the state lands for cultural resources survey. Due to the current winter conditions at the proposed site, we are not able to begin work until snow thaws. Finally, the findings of this survey will inform the cultural resources section of the draft environmental impact statement. Any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Snarsky? Thank you. Watoma Solar Project, Mr. Caputo.
Chair Drew, I will also be giving the update.
Okay, thank you.
for
I didn't
Watoma
know I
Solar.
heard
This is
he
Amy
was here.
Hoffmeyer.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes. Sorry, I just minimized my update. I apologize. Again, for the record, this is Amy Hoffmeyer. Staff are continuing coordination with our contracted agencies, tribal staff, and the applicant to refine identified mitigation for the Watoma proposal. Staff are also working in coordination with the Office of Administrative Hearings and our Attorney General support in preparation for logistics associated with the adjudicative proceedings for this project. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions? Thank you. Hop Hill Solar Project, Mr. Barnes.
Thank you, Chair Drew and council members. For the record, this is Joan Barnes, FSEC staff for the Hop Hill application. Work continues with the applicant to complete studies and reports needed to make a SEPA determination. We are continuing to coordinate and review the application with our contractor, contracted agencies, and tribal governments. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions? Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Carriger Solar, Ms. Snarsky.
Yes, thank you, Chair Drew. For the record, this is Joanne Snarsky, the siting specialist for Carriger Solar. In early January, we received feedback from the Klickitat County Public Works Department on the draft traffic impact assessment. We will continue to work with the county to refine the assessment to ensure all impacts can be appropriately mitigated. Staff also received a third revision to the Cultural Resources Survey from the applicant. It is currently being reviewed by the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation and the Yakama Nation. On a final note, the interagency agreement for the completion of the traditional cultural property study by the Yakama Nation for this site has been fully executed and work is underway. The work is scheduled to be completed in December 2024. Any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Snarsky? Thank you. We are now moving on to the Horse Heaven Wind Farm. We're going to have an update from Ms. Moon. I am actually going to take the mitigation discussion first, unless there are any objections from council. Ms. Moon, why don't you go ahead with the update, and then we'll move to the presentation by Mr. Green.
Okay, so maybe you can clarify, Council Chair Drew. I had an update on the information on firefighting from DNR and the Benton County Fire Chief. Do you want me to go ahead with that first?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. For the record, this is Amy Moon reporting on the Horse Heaven Wind Project. At the December 20th council meeting, I presented information regarding firefighting and fire suppression that led to the council's request for additional information regarding the roles of the Washington Department of Natural Resources, referred to here further as DNR, and the local fire district on fire protection and firefighting in the proposed Horse Heaven Wind Project area. FSEC staff worked with DNR and the Benton County Fire District Number 1 to answer the council's questions. Rush Lane, the DNR division manager in the Wildland Fire Management Division, and the Benton County Fire District Fire Chief Lonnie Click provided responses to the council's questions. Both the original questions and responses from the December council meeting and the follow-up questions and responses are included in the January 24th council packet for your review. But I do have some additional updates on that. So I want to start off with clarifications to information I presented at the December council meeting regarding aerial firefighting, specifically if the project area would be a no-fly zone. According to Mr. Lane, the height of the vertical obstacles or turbines is what would prevent aerial fire response in the interior of the proposed project. Mr. Lane further stated that he doesn't see any way to mitigate for the aerial response of turbine heights up to 657 feet or aerial mitigation for the proposed turbine spacing. The aerial firefighting questions and responses I submitted to DNR are included in your council packet. However, in further follow-up, FSEC received additional information from Mr. Lane on January 26, which was too late for the council packet, clarifying DNR aerial firefighting efforts, which I will go over now. At the December meeting, the council asked if DNR had any recommended mitigation measures that may address aerial firefighting activities in association with those turbine heights up to 657 feet. DNR indicated mitigating conflict with tactical area operations to provide safety and maneuvering space may not be possible due to density and height of the proposed turbines that would need an additional safety buffer of 1 to 2 tower heights around the project to quote, ensure safe separation for aircraft operations, end quote. Mr. Lane also expressed concern over the long lines and bucket that extend up to 150 feet below the helicopter airframe. In further communication, he clarified that the DNR's owned and contracted fleet includes light, medium, and heavy type 3, 2, and 1 helicopters, as well as single engine and twin engine turboprop aircraft. He stated that the DNR fixed wing tankers operate in both retardant and scooping configurations, which would be like scooping water from a river. And he is comfortable that they can safely operate the 3 types of helicopters and light tankers, which are AT-820 models, at a standoff distance of approximately 1/4 mile, and that he is reasonably certain DNR would hear the same for the twin engine scoopers, which are the CL-145 models, and twin tankers, which are the Q400 models, but can verify that with his vendor if needed. If the council wants that, we can get that verification. Mr. Lane also noted that DNR infrequently borrow the large and very large jet engine transport type aircraft present in the federal fleet, which are DC-10s. And these are referred to as very large air tankers, but these fly on less than 1% of DNR incidents. In the information included in the council packet, Mr. Lane expressed his high concern about damage to the wind farm that could likely occur from bucket or retardant drops in the wind farm area, as these drops come down with the force of gravity and many thousands of pounds of water or retardant that could easily snap off blades and can do other damage to towers. Mr. Lane further stated that DNR takes great care to avoid damage to high-value infrastructure when firefighting and could easily do more damage conducting aerial drops within a wind project than the fire itself might do. And that potential would also likely lead to DNR to make a no-go call for aerial operations within the perimeter of the wind farm. Mr. Lane wanted to remind FSEC that the go or no-go call for safe operations near obstacles will be made by the pilot in command at the time of the mission, and that DNR remain concerned that operations interior to a large-scale wind project would pose unacceptable risks to air crews. However, he further stated that he believes they have multiple effective tools to do aerial firefighting around the perimeter of wind projects from a safe standoff distance. I conferred with the Benton County Fire District #1 Fire Chief Lonnie Click. He reviewed the DNR information and stated that his fire district responses would be nearly exact, and that the vertical obstruction of the turbine tower is the ultimate hazard to firefighting aircraft, in turn requiring the aircraft to fly a considerable distance from the towers. Chief Click also stated he agrees with what DNR stated and that about the pilot discretion and working outside the proposed project perimeter are key factors in fire response. I know that was a lot of information. Does the council have any questions?
Are there any questions from council members?
It looks like Councilmember Young may have.
I don't know why I'm not seeing that on my screen. We're going to pause for just a moment while I make sure I can have, Andrea, can you come help? Just a second. I need to have this where I can see. I don't see the hands.
You're not muted, Chair.
Oh. Oh, there we go. Mr. Young, is your hand up?
Yes, it is.
See it. Can you see the hands?
No, because I'm sharing the screen.
Okay, I'm going to have to ask you to let me know when you raise your hands. Mr. Young.
Thank you. Amy, would it be fair to summarize what you recounted, that aerial fire suppression would not be feasible within the wind farm perimeter or within a 1/4 mile buffer of the perimeter, which was being referred to as the standoff distance? Is that a correct summary interpretation?
Yes, based on what Mr. Lane provided to FSEC, that is correct.
And I understand that Chief Click concurs with Mr. Lane.
Yes, yes,
Thank you.
Chief Click did concur. Any further questions? I see another hand, but I'm not sure that we can take Paul Croupen's question.
That's correct. We're only taking members from Horse Heaven Council members.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I would like to continue with my update.
Go ahead.
Okay. As directed by the council at the December 20th council meeting, FSEC staff also made updates to other proposed mitigation measures presented in the final environmental impact statement issued on October 31st of 2023. 62 comments were received during the comment campaign associated with the council's direction in December to produce figures demonstrating potential project exclusions for their consideration. Our SEPA specialist, Sean Green, is here to present the proposed updates and to answer any questions. And so if you're ready, Sean, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, I believe Chair Drew wanted to lead off before I begin.
That's right. Thank you, Mr. Green. So as the council continues our discussion on our recommendation to the governor on the Horse Heaven Wind and Solar Project, I'd like to make a few comments. Much of what you have seen in our meetings over the past couple months has been a discussion of mitigation measures recommended in the final EIS. The council will consider any changes to these measures, taking into account not just the information we've received through the EIS, but the information we've received as a council through the adjudicative process and the comments we have received from the public throughout our review. We thank everyone for your participation in our process. Mr. Green, if you would show figure 2.5 from the final EIS, which we have referred to several times during our conversation over the past couple of months. And please describe to the council what is represented here.
Yes, thank you, Chair Drew and council members. For the record, this is Sean Green, SEPA specialist for FSEC. What this figure represents, there are two roughly equivalent figures in Chapter 2 of the FEIS, each representing one of the two turbine options being proposed. This is turbine option 1. And this figure represents an assessment of turbine impacts to a number of resources, specifically areas within 2 miles of a ferruginous hawk nest, areas with medium or higher modeled linkage for a wildlife movement corridor, areas with shrub steppe habitat, turbines that would create noise impacts, visual impacts, shadow flicker impacts, or would have impacts to archaeological and architectural resources with traditional cultural property resources shown on the confidential council map that was provided under separate cover to this map. This also shows turbines that would have impacts to recreational opportunities. In terms of the color coding, red color turbines on this map are indicative of turbines that were either assessed as having a high impact on 3 or more of those listed resources, or having an impact to 1 or more particularly vulnerable or sensitive resources, such as ferruginous hawk nests or archaeological resources.
Mr. Young, you have a question. Now I can
Yes,
see you.
thank you. The way you described that, I just want to be clear that this map does not take into account impacts to traditional cultural properties and that those are identified separately on the confidential map. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So TCPs are not factored into what color the turbines are shaded on this map, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Were there any further questions regarding this map and the meaning of the color coding, or what resources are being assessed as part of this color coding and the determination of the class of impact?
Okay, thank you. So I do want to, like the council, to start our conversation by discussing the elimination of the areas in which the red turbines are located, as you've heard described. And I will say that although in impact, we don't have specific turbines identified, we do know from the information that we have received that is confidential from the Yakama Nation that every turbine, the entire site impacts traditional cultural properties. So I want to make that statement that the entire project does impact traditional cultural properties. But what I would like to do is to ask the council to consider eliminating the turbines represented by the red dots, but within those areas. So not just within the entire areas represented by those red dots. And that is because of the multiple compacting impacts in this area described. First of all, we've received information through the FEIS, again, through the adjudication and public comments. In my view, taking this action will eliminate all turbines in 2-mile circles around current and historic ferruginous hawk nests. And it will reduce the impact of the project on cultural resources and traditional cultural properties. It will reduce the impacts to the wildlife corridors throughout the project. It will reduce visual impact to communities to the east of the project and remove turbines from a prominent ridgeline. It will reduce potential impact on aerial firefighting on the slope northeast of the project and will reduce the impact of the project on some recreational areas. Will not eliminate all impacts, but there will be a reduction in impacts by taking this action. And I'd just like to ask council members, please feel free to share your view of this action. Mr. Green?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one point. You mentioned that this would reduce the potential risk to aerial firefighting on the slope to the northeast of the project area. It is actually the northwest of the project area.
Oh, thank you. Okay. My mistake. Thank you. Council members, I'd like to understand your views. Mr. Livingston.
Thanks, Chair Giroux. I appreciate the further clarification about what the green, red, yellow dots are on the map. I also appreciate the work that's gone into this, and I agree with you. We've gone through such a deliberative, intense process of trying to understand what impacts this size of a project has posed for us to consider. And so the approach of eliminating those turbines that are in red here, I support for the reasons you mentioned. They're going to reduce but not eliminate risk to the hawk. They're going to reduce and not eliminate complications to firefighting. There's the habitat connectivity also is going to be, the impacts will be reduced but not eliminated. So we're working towards a project that could be permitted and from my perspective, without having such a huge size, scope, and scale that would impact all these important resources. So those are my views and comments at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Young?
Chair, I support what you've described, removing all the red turbines. That is not the full extent of my concern, and there are additional turbines that I would like to see eliminated. I think we'll get to that later in the discussion, but I support what you've described for the reasons you gave.
Thank you. Other council members? Mr. Levitt?
Yeah, hello. I'm supportive of the comments you made earlier, Chair Drew. You know, I guess I do have some questions for FSEC staff about how viable some of the strings of turbines are when a large number are eliminated. For example, there's some yellow, perhaps some orange, kind of in the middle of the project, and so, you know, I don't know how to answer those questions, but to make the project viable, you know, there is infrastructure that connects the rows of turbines, so I'm concerned about some of those.
Mr. Green, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can address that. So a few of the turbines that you've mentioned, specifically the ones that are identified as class 1 or class 2 impacts here in the yellow and orange dots, would potentially be excluded by other mitigation measures that the council is going to consider as part of this meeting. As for the secondary project components, things like roads and transmission lines, we will be presenting the council with a set of exclusion measures that they can impose for primary project components, things like turbines, solar arrays, and BESSes, battery stations, and a secondary question about what exclusions the council would like to impose on secondary components, things like those roads and transmission lines. So there will be a level of delineation there that the council can consider and provide guidance to staff on how you would like to see those exclusion measures put into place.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments by council members? Ms. Brewster?
Yeah, I want to support the notion of eliminating the turbines with the highest impacts on multiple features. So the turbines marked in red, I am supportive of that notion.
Thank you. And again, because we're talking about the areas that those red turbines represent. So I want to say that again, because it's not moving them a few feet. They would not be in that entire area. You've seen it in different ways in Wild 5 that we will see later as well. But I just want to say that for the record. So hearing that we have strong support for doing that, I wanted to lay the foundation of our conversation and the fact that it doesn't rest on one particular resource, but on multiple impacts that we have been concerned about as we have heard throughout this project. So with that, I will ask Sean then to move on to the next part of his presentation.
Thank you, Chair Drew. And I did want to mention that the council has access to a confidential version of the same figure that actually shows red shaded areas, which are the boundaries of some of those particularly vulnerable or sensitive resources. And that shows the approximate outlines of the areas of the micrositing corridor that would be excluded if these mitigation measures were put into place to exclude those red colored turbines. So moving forward, I wanted to go through the various exclusion mitigation measures that the council was discussing at the previous meeting. In cases where it's a new measure such as this, Veg 10, I'll show the text as proposed to be included within a draft SCA where the council to recommend approval for this project.
May I interrupt you?
Yes.
Okay, so I asked Mr. Green to present this. I had presented at the last meeting the idea of eliminating the east solar field. As I looked at comments and discussed this further, I wanted to present a different option to the council that would eliminate solar arrays in any rabbit brush shrubland or any of the priority habitat areas, rather than request the entire solar field be eliminated. So that's where this comes from. Do you have more that you'd like to share on that?
Yes. So this is just to show the text of that proposed mitigation measure were it to be incorporated. With the next slide here, there we go. So this is a figure showing most of what was originally proposed as that east solar field. Those red polygons are the boundaries of the originally proposed solar arrays. In the final application submitted by the applicant, they significantly reduced, or I shouldn't say significant, they heavily reduced the footprint of the proposed east solar array to approximately what's encased in that green polygon that I drew. It accounted for a roughly 80% reduction in impacts to sensitive habitat types that would be targeted by this mitigation measure, resulting in approximately 140 acres of total impacts associated with the east solar array. There are no proposed permanent disturbance impacts to any of these habitat types with the Counterwells solar array or the Sellard solar array, which are the other two options under consideration. So this is just an indication of what the east solar array looks like in the current proposal, and the blue in that central polygon indicates east side interior grasslands, which is a priority habitat designated by WDFW, and the pink polygon to the bottom left is rabbit brush shrubland, which would also be excluded as part of this mitigation measure.
Mr. Young.
Are the three habitat types listed there, east side interior grassland, rabbit brush shrubland and sagebrush shrub steppe. Does that comprise all of the DFW designated priority habitat types?
That includes rabbit brush shrubland, which is generally considered an early successional stage of shrub steppe and is so often incorporated with other priority habitat types. The other two are the only priority habitat types designated by WDFW that have any impacts associated with them as a result of solar arrays as part of this project.
Could you flip back to the previous slide that had the text?
Yes.
So where it says or DFW designated priority habitat types, is it just those other two that we've specifically talked about?
It would be, sorry.
Or are there other DFW designated priority habitat types that would be included here?
It would include all designated priority habitat types. There are no others within this area.
Okay.
So essentially,
sorry, cutting you off there.
No, I was going to say effectively it is those other two types, the sagebrush shrub steppe and east side interior grassland.
Okay, so in on the ground, those are the only three types that are involved really for our conversation.
Correct.
Thank you.
And so the council that the question that I would like to present to the council for your deliberations and discussions so as to give guidance to staff is for this proposed mitigation measure, should all solar arrays be allowed on rabbit brush shrubland and priority habitats with compensatory mitigation at the FEIS recommended ratios, which is the current version incorporated into the FEIS, or excluded from all rabbit brush shrubland and priority habitats, which is the proposed version that was shown before. And I would like to indicate these are not the only two options. If the council has further options, absolutely provide staff with that direction.
So reasons from my perspective are that there is, we are trying to reduce impacts on ferruginous hawks. If there is area that is potential for their finding their appropriate sources of food, then I think we should look at keeping those and not covering them with solar panels. But I am open to conversation by the council. I did want to recognize that some of the east solar field is on areas that are currently under agricultural production and less valuable for the species of concern. Are there any comments? Mr. Livingston.
Can we go back, Sean, to the, I just want to see how many acres are we talking about?
It's approximately 140 acres.
And if we go with your proposed option B, what would be the impacts?
Essentially, the pink colored polygon and the blue colored polygon would be excluded, and the colors surrounding those polygons would also be excluded from the siting of any solar arrays. That would give the applicant either the option of reducing the footprint of the solar array to exclude those plots, or restructuring their proposed east solar array to cover the same number of acres, but no longer cover those priority habitat areas for rabbit brush shrubland.
You know, it'd be helpful for me if I knew what was the I guess I can see some of the surrounding habitat types to the north and to the east and to the west. I don't know what's to the south because I guess it's outside of the project boundaries. Do we know what the habitat looks like to that south? Because one of the key components here for viable habitat is to have larger acreages. If these are isolated pieces, they have less importance than they would if they're connected to some other existing acres to the south and elsewhere. So I don't have that full picture of that. So at this point, I would, without that information, I would lean towards supporting B if we were to go forward with supporting the solar fields to the east here.
And to address your question, I do not know off the top of my head what the habitat cover is to the south. That is an area outside of project control, so I don't know that we have on the ground surveys of that vegetation, but the surrounding areas to the east, west, and north are primarily agricultural.
Thank you.
Mr. Young?
Chair Drew, I also support option B as you have proposed, but I feel for reasons that we'll get to, I think, later in our discussion, I favor eliminating the entire east solar field. But to the extent of this particular point here, I do support option B.
Others? Ms. Brewster?
I will weigh in my support for option B at this point. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Eli. I support option B as well, as long as the applicant has some flexibility to adjust.
Okay. Let's move on to the next question then.
Okay, thank you. Next is the modifications to Habitat 1, which is the mitigation measure addressing wildlife movement corridors. As a result of previous council discussions, it has been restructured to, I should say, the original version allowed siting of all project components within modeled wildlife movement corridors, so long as the applicant produced a corridor mitigation plan in consultation with FSEC that we felt appropriately addressed the impacts. The current version, following the previous council meetings discussion, would prohibit the siting of primary project components, such as specifically turbines, solar arrays, and battery stations, in any movement corridors modeled as medium to very high linkage, and would prohibit secondary project components such as roads and power lines and substations in modeled high to very high linkage movement corridors. And in the previous meeting, council also directed staff to seek out guidance from WDFW staff on how they viewed this modification of the original measure. First, FSEC requested from WDFW staff how primary project components should be defined for the purposes of mitigation throughout this document. And WDFW staff believed that primary project components should be defined as turbines, solar arrays, and battery stations, consistent with the current version of this measure that you see on the left. The second question we asked was whether primary project components should be excluded from medium to very high linkage or high to very high linkage corridors. And WDFW staff believe that primary project components should not be cited in medium to very high linkage corridors, again, consistent with the current version of HAB1. And the third question also resulted in WDFW staff concurring with the current version of HAB1 that secondary, that's a typo, secondary project components should not be cited in high to very high linkage corridors, but could be cited in medium corridors with a corridor mitigation plan as included in HAB1. And just for the purposes of recollection and this conversation, this is a map of the modeled wildlife movement corridors throughout the project area. The locations most of concern are this central medium and high linkage corridor that bisects the site, and the second part is this narrow strip of high and medium movement corridor that's more of a concern for the current location of the proposed primary transmission line for the applicant. And we can come back to this figure during discussion.
Can you go back to what, go ahead, you had another view there.
Yeah, so this is going to continue. This is a figure produced for the purposes of this discussion. It's not exact, it's just a visual aid. And it is for turbine option 1, which just as a reminder, turbine option 1 would cite a maximum of 222 turbines with a maximum height of 499 feet. Option 2, for which a similar figure has been produced but is not in this presentation currently, would cite a maximum of 141 turbines, so fewer turbines, with a maximum height of 671 feet, fewer turbines at a taller height. In terms of what project components are currently proposed in high or above wildlife linkage corridors, there is the primary transmission line at 3 different points, one within this bigger square and twice within the smaller rectangle. 22 option 1 turbines are within high or above corridors, and 6 option 2 turbines are within those higher above corridors. Within medium or within just the medium linkage level of linkage corridor is again the primary transmission line at 3 different points, and then 11 option 1 turbines or 16 option 2 turbines. There are no solar arrays, battery stations or substations that are currently proposed in medium or higher modeled habitat movement corridors. And
of those numbers, yes, some of those turbine numbers you've identified, we've already talked about eliminating some of those in those areas. So if we reduce that, is that correct?
Yes, many of the turbines that are within these movement corridors would also potentially be excluded by other mitigation measures that we're going to discuss in today's meeting, specifically the Ferruginous hawk species 5 mitigation.
I will
many
say
of them.
To the council members that I have been thinking quite a bit about, as Mr. Levitt brought up, connectivity, stranded assets, as well as the impact that turbines, once they're constructed, have on wildlife movement. It's not, they don't entirely block the movement. In fact, I know we have seen, some of us who've been here for a while, seen examples of wildlife throughout the Wild Horse Wind project, for example. I would like to suggest that we don't eliminate, that we go back to the original FEIS recommended version, because I think it's important to maintain an ability to have infrastructure throughout this project. So perhaps, Sean, if you can remind us again what the original mitigation was.
Yes, so the original requests that the applicant locate all project components outside of medium or above linkage corridors to the extent feasible. And then for any components that would be cited within medium or above corridors, there are a series of measures that we would require to be incorporated into a corridor mitigation plan that describes the proposed impacts and identifies effective mitigation and restoration as a result of those impacts. And that plan would be submitted to the pre-operational technical advisory group prior to construction, approved by FSEC, and then monitored and enforced by FSEC with the guidance of the technical advisory committee throughout the life of the project.
Any comments from council members? Again, I think we've reduced the number of turbines in this area. Mr. Young.
Yeah, I disagree with going back to the original language. I favor the way we configured it on December 20th.
And I have questions with the various options available, if the council would like to have that up for discussion. So the first would be for primary project components, which is turbine, solar arrays, and battery substations. Should they be allowed within these corridors when combined with the corridor mitigation plan, which is the version included in the FEIS, excluded from high to very high linkage corridors? Again, there are no very high modeled linkage corridors within the project area, but from high to very high, or excluded from medium to very high linkage corridors, which is the current version that was shown as discussed at the previous council meeting.
Are there any other comments from council members? Mr. Livingston?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Lenny. I want to stick with what we agreed to back in December if possible.
So to exclude
This question is specific to primary components. There's a subsequent
primary
question.
solar arrays, BESS, and turbines from medium to very high linkage corridors.
Yes.
Okay. C. Are there any other comments from council members? Ms. Brewster?
Yeah, Sean, can you talk about the transmission components that might be affected by this?
So there is a subsequent question to this one regarding how the council would like to incorporate exclusions for secondary components, and transmission lines are a part of that. This first question is just regarding turbines, solar arrays, and BESSes, or battery stations. But the primary concern for transmission lines is, as I mentioned, this area, the primary transmission line for the project does run from east to west through this area. So it would have to be resited further north. And then the current proposed line runs through this red rectangle to the left. And at 2 points, it does cross a modeled high linkage movement corridor. So it would not be allowed in those sites and would have to be, again, restructured to a different location.
But that's coming next.
Yes, that is the next question. This first question is
First
just
one's about
dealing with
turbines, solar
and battery
arrays,
stations.
and BESS.
Yes.
Mr. Levitt?
Well, I guess I just wanted to ask, so when we say wildlife corridor, are we primarily talking about pronghorn or other species as well?
There are other species that will make use of these corridors, deer and the like. It is modeled based on the I forget the name of the organization. It's the Washington Wildlife Movement Corridor Working Group, I believe. It's that is the data set that is being used for this figure here. And it covers a variety of species.
And is this the figure that was also used at one point for transportation planning, or are the purposes broader than for this data?
I don't have the answer to that question right now.
I guess my concern is that we're primarily looking at a wildlife corridor for sort of a reintroduced species that I'm not a wildlife expert, but I don't believe the pronghorn are threatened or endangered. So I'm concerned that we're making large adjustments to the project, similar to what we're doing for ferruginous hawk when the species is not threatened or endangered. I guess I'm interested in more compromise options if possible.
Mr. Livingston?
Yeah, I think I might be able to address some of that. So I haven't looked at the habitat connectivity study itself, other than these data layers that have been provided to us in some time. It's based on existing habitat, so it'd be shrub steppe or interior grassland, shrublands, and then some of the species that they did modeling for included Townsend's ground squirrels, badgers. I can't tell you all of them, but it wasn't, in fact, it was done before or right after the pronghorn were reintroduced. So it wasn't based on pronghorn. It was based on other species that are dependent upon having habitat connected on the ground for their movement patterns. So it's not just pronghorn. This is a number of different species that they're looking at. And if some of the importance of this corridor habitat is if you look at everything surrounding it, all the green is non-habitat. What's remaining in the Horse Heaven Hills is along the ridge line. You have that red corridor that goes up in the northwest corner of the map that goes north to south. And then you have this one band that goes right through the middle of this project layout that then connects to habitat further south. Ultimately, there's some connectivity that goes into Oregon. And so there's this narrow band of habitat remaining connecting the wildlife core habitat areas across this landscape. So that's the importance of these areas for various species that would use that.
A question that I have, and thank you for that. Again, kind of getting back to the disruptive nature, if we're not, let's say we don't have solar arrays, we don't have BESS, but there's temporary, significantly fewer, I would say, turbines in that area, and they have a wildlife corridor plan. Can you put those options back up again, please? A, B, and C.
Okay. And I would like to
excluded,
reiterate.
maybe B, if we looked at excluded from the high linkage corridor area, and combined with a corridor mitigation plan. Is that someplace we can get to? Rather than the medium? But you're looking at, Mike, sorry, I'm just asking you again.
Yeah, Chair, are you asking for these primary components or secondary?
Well, the primary components, they're not planning, but we could say solar arrays and BESS, but the turbines are the only ones.
Right.
And
Yes.
if so, that's fine. I just want to confirm, given Eli's question as well.
Yeah, so it's hard to track what we agreed to with those red turbine strings and that map in the beginning of the presentation to what we're talking about right now, whether there would be primary components, turbines specifically in that area or not. I don't recall. It'd be best to keep the turbines out of there. That would in from medium to the very high linkage corridors. That would be my preference.
Okay.
And Mike, when you say best to keep them out, is this based on research that WDFW has done about the porosity of wind turbines and specific species that were considered when making the wildlife corridor map?
It's a combination, Eli, of remaining habitat, the species that might exist there, Townsend's ground squirrels, for example, those being a primary prey for ferruginous hawks. And so their interest in foraging in those areas to obtain for food for themselves as well as their young as they're raising them. So it's a combination. These habitat linkages are the remaining habitat in an area that animals can use either to live or to migrate through or to forage. And so I have a concern because there's so little of it left in that area that it's super important for all of the critters that are dependent upon the shrub steppe habitat.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful for my understanding.
Okay. Mr. Levitt, what's your thought at this point?
yeah, I guess I can live with B or C. I'll go with the flow of the council.
Any other comments from council members? Thank you. I think Ms. Brewster.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Councilman Livingston's comments are very helpful. So for the primary components, I guess I will agree with C. I think if B could be a possible compromise, but I'm going to defer to WDFW's opinion on that.
Thank you. So I will say, let's then move on with C.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is the same question, but essentially for secondary project components, which includes things like roads, substations, transmission lines. So should these secondary components be allowed within corridors with the corridor mitigation plan, which was the FEIS version, excluded from high to very high linkage corridors, which is the current version based on the previous council meeting, or further excluded from medium to very high linkage corridors as well?
Mr. Young?
Could we go back and look at the language from December 20? Because I think there was a last sentence that was not read here this afternoon about the applicant could cite in secondary components in the medium linkage if they produced a rationale that satisfied FSEC. Is that incorporated into option C for the secondary components?
For secondary components, the current version is option B, which excludes them from high to very high, but would allow secondary components within medium modeled corridor linkage with this corridor mitigation plan. And that was based on, pardon me, that was based on the discussion from the previous council meeting.
Could you flip back to the options again?
Yes.
That seems to be like a modified B, because our discussions on, if I got this right, our discussions on December 20th did not take it so far as to completely exclude secondary components from medium.
Yes,
is that correct?
That is correct. And this version shown here, the current version is B, which does not exclude secondary components from medium. It just would.
Well, but it puts a condition on putting them in medium, is they would have to meet the corridor mitigation plan, and the rationale would have to be presented to FSEC. It's not just open season on medium areas under what we talked about on the 20th.
Okay.
Correct.
And
I want to make sure I'm correct.
Sure.
I
Yes.
hope I said that right.
Yes, with the current version, based on our understanding of the previous council discussion, secondary components in medium linkage areas would still need to be presented to FSEC with a corridor mitigation plan included. If there is a desire to remove that stipulation and allow secondary components to be cited within medium corridor linkage without a mitigation plan, that can be incorporated into this measure if that's the council's desire.
I think that's the way that B is written right now. And so B does not really reflect the totality of where we landed on secondary components on December 20th. B should have additional language about citing in medium is predicated upon an approval by FSEC and a corridor mitigation plan.
Yes,
I don't think there's any disagreement about the current what the current version is, just how it's being described here in B. It's inadequately described here in B.
That's right. Yep.
And I agree with that. I used abbreviated text just for this question, but the essence of option B here is the full text of that current version based on the 1220 meeting that was shown earlier. I should have added more descriptive text to this answer.
Thank you for that clarification. And with that clarification, I can support option B for the secondary components.
Okay. Other comments? So this is the secondary components, the transmission lines. Can you show us again, let's see, the map? Which one? So, and then you had another one with open.
Yes.
So essentially, go ahead and describe what this is again.
Sure. So the empty spaces that you see, the small empty spaces in this transmission line here, and then the larger square incorporates all areas of high linkage. So no components, primary or secondary, would be allowed in those areas. And that's why in this visual aid, those areas have been erased of project components. As currently designed, the project's primary transmission line does go through this, I think it might be shown on, yes. The primary transmission line does go through this high linkage area throughout much of that central corridor, and then passes through high linkage area twice in this upper corridor here. So for secondary components, that would be the primary effect of this mitigation being imposed, that the primary transmission line would have to be redesigned to be located for this main corridor farther north, and for this northwestern corridor likely farther west.
Mr. Livingston.
Sean, do you know what the size of the transmission line will be? KV?
Not off the top of my head, I want to say 230 kilovolt. I'm not sure if that's correct though.
And there'd likely be a road associated with it, gravel road, or do we know?
I don't know if there is a road associated with the transmission line throughout its extent, but there are project roads that cross much of the project area, so they would be affected by exclusion from high linkage corridors as well.
Yeah, I just wonder if there's possibilities of associating these with existing roads and other lines that are already out there. I don't have a sense of that, or if we're talking about uninterrupted habitat having a brand new transmission line in a road going through it.
Is there a possibility that, from what you say, we could say that let me think, that it would be excluded from high. Can you take bring the language back up for me? Thank you. Secondary project components should be excluded from high and very high linkage corridors unless there is existing then it's following existing infrastructure, and it's comes with the corridor mitigation plan and through the staff. I'm trying to figure out a pathway where that could be considered. Ms. Brewster?
Yeah, I just want to voice my support for preserving the corridor areas, and then voice a concern with the reality of moving transmission corridors. I don't know how easy that is to redesign, and if that is the type of thing that makes a project like this infeasible. So I don't know if staff could provide more information on that, or could be acquired.
Chair Drew, this is Sonia Bumpus, if I may.
Go ahead.
I was just going to mention, as I was listening to the deliberation, that the FEIS did consider the impacts to these corridors and the wildlife and the habitat. And so I think that the corridor mitigation plan that mitigation that came in through the FEIS is good mitigation here. So I just wanted to make that comment, and part of that too is just to say that for the secondary components, I think that there would be some very real consequences to the project design if we start to go outside of the proposed mitigation measure in the FEIS, such that we may even see just the totality of the project amended. And so I just wanted to make that comment, just hearing that some of the council members were wondering about that.
Thank you. Other comments? I think I have a view that we may, and maybe that's not correct, we may be a bit conflicted on an absolute exclusion, even in the high linkage corridors for the secondary movement. Can we I guess I'm going to have to ask for a vote on this.
Before a vote, may I ask a clarification question?
Yes.
I'm sorry if I missed this. Is it possible that some of these are a little hybrid, like you could do B and there would be a corridor mitigation plan?
I think the problem comes from it being the exclusion being in the high linkage corridor according to this map. Because we've heard that the current design has transmission lines that go through the area identified on the map as a high linkage corridor. Again, I would say that it is disturbance. It may already be disturbed. We don't know that from looking at the map that we have in front of us. So I think that presents us with a challenge. Go ahead, somebody else. Mr. Livingston.
Yeah, thank you. Given that we don't know what's underneath these colors on the ground and the ability to co-locate some of this infrastructure with existing infrastructure, which is a best management practice if you can do that. Can we stall on this one? Hate to say that, but give us a little bit of time, give us some information so that we know what this looks like on the ground. Otherwise, with the information I have, I'm going to be conservative in my vote.
So can we say perhaps that if it's co-located with existing roads and infrastructure, then it would be a conversation and a mitigation plan?
And if that's not possible, what do we do then?
Yeah, I would propose that, this is Sonia Bumpus, I'd propose at that point, you still have your corridor mitigation plan, which was proposed in the FEIS.
I hear concern. I don't know that I don't know how much more information we could get on this going forward. We are deep into the details. So I am going to go ahead and ask for a vote of Mr. Green. Go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say that if it is the council's desire to see a version of B, so excluding from high to very high linkage corridors for secondary components, but allowing them within medium and then the modification would be when co-located with existing infrastructure. That is a version of this mitigation that we could write up.
How does that sound to council members?
I'm interested in that.
Okay, Mr. Young?
I'd like to have that clarified once more and repeated.
Sure. So secondary components would be allowed in medium or below habitat linkage corridors with a habitat mitigation, or sorry, a corridor mitigation plan, and then only allowed in high to very high linkage corridors when co-located with existing infrastructure and again accompanied by a corridor mitigation plan.
Thank you for the clarification, but I do not support that.
Okay. I will call for a vote on the version just described by Mr. Green. Secondary project components allowed in medium to high linkage. And I'm like,
Sorry.
Say
It's
it again,
medium.
please.
Yes, of course. Secondary components would be allowed in medium and below when accompanied by a corridor mitigation plan, and then excluded from high to very high unless co-located with existing infrastructure and again accompanied by a corridor mitigation plan.
Okay. All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hands. Okay. All those opposed? Okay,
Lenny Young votes no.
thank you.
Voted for it.
Oh, you did? I just didn't see.
No,
So
I
we
did-
will move.
I did not vote for it. The hands from
Correct.
the first vote were not taken down when I raised my hand.
Yes, I saw that. Mr. Young voted no. It is approved. Thank you, everybody. Let's move on to the next question.
Okay, thank you. The next is species 5, which is the species-specific mitigation for the ferruginous hawk. There are several sides of this. The original text is on the left from the FEIS. The amended text is on the right, current to the previous council meeting. The original version would only allow project components to be sited within 2 miles, a 2-mile radius of an existing or a documented ferruginous hawk nest, if the applicant were able to prove to FSEC and the PTAG that the nest was not active, that there was no viable habitat in the area, and they had produced a species-specific mitigation and monitoring plan. As a result of previous council deliberations, this measure has been amended to exclude all primary project components from that 2-mile radius of any identified nest, but potentially allow for secondary components based on those initial restrictions. Again, proving that the nest is not active, there is no viable habitat, and they have produced a species-specific mitigation and monitoring plan. And the edits to the text throughout essentially just reflect that change. And also based on council direction, staff, FSEC staff reached out to WDFW staff on whether there was an indicator or a belief that there were any project components that could be sited within 2 miles of a documented nest that would not have adverse effects on the ferruginous hawk. And WDSW staff indicated that there are no project components that could be sited within the 2-mile radius without having adverse impacts. So all project components would have an adverse impact. And this is, again, the visual aid figure. The areas with the red shaded corridors are the existing proposed micrositing corridors that, with the current version of species 5, would not be allowed to site any turbines or other primary project components such as solar arrays and battery stations. The clear colored corridors are areas outside of those 2-mile radii and would be allowed to site project components normally. So the areas that would be included within this exclusion area. So the 2 mile radius of all identified nests would include 116 option 1 turbines or 73 option 2 turbines. It would include the entirety of the East Solar siting area. It would include 3 proposed substation locations and significant portions of the primary transmission line. So the question for the council, again, this is a 2-part question. The first is regarding just primary project components, so turbines, solar arrays, and battery substations. Should those primary project components be allowed within 2 miles of a documented ferruginous hawk nest only when the applicant can demonstrate that the nest is inactive, no viable foraging habitat is present, and the applicant produces a mitigation and management plan specific to that species, which was the version of this measure included in the FEIS. Option B would exclude all primary project components within a half mile of documented nests, which is the existing WDFW seasonal buffer, and would just essentially make that permanent for all project components. And then for any primary project components within a half mile to 2 miles of a nest, the original species 5 would again apply. So project components would be allowed if the applicant can meet those requirements. And then the third version here is what was proposed at the last council meeting, which is that all primary project components are excluded from areas within 2 miles of a documented ferruginous hawk nest.
Question for you, are all, based on our earlier map of the areas identified by red turbines and the multiple compounding impacts that those turbines have that we discussed earlier, removing those turbines in those areas, does that remove all turbines within the 2 miles of a documented ferruginous hawk nest?
I would say every red colored turbine in that first figure is not only red because it is within 2 miles of a nest, but all red turbines on that figure are within a 2 mile radius.
And there are
of a
no
nest.
others.
There are no other red turbines that are outside of.
There are
the
no
2 mile
other
radius of
turbines
the
that are,
nest.
yeah, okay. So I want to start from that question because I want us to seriously consider the solar arrays and BESS if they are in the same category of creating impacts to the ferruginous hawk foraging area, which is what I focused on by the new mitigation measure that we talked about earlier. In my opinion, I think it is the turbines that are the most impact, and it's also the elimination of existing priority habitat. But if what we are doing is putting solar arrays within those 2 miles of the nests on agricultural already disturbed property, I guess my view is it should be perhaps just the turbines that are eliminated in the 2 mile ferruginous hawk zone. So comments on that? Mr. Livingston.
Yeah, I'm still supporting C, which would exclude all primary project components. And if that would include solar, then I would be supporting that still.
Okay. Mr. Young?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Livingston, and I support option C.
Okay. Others?
I think I might need a review of the map again because I was a little confused by the explanation, but I think I do not support C.
Okay.
Can you clarify which map you would like to see again?
Sorry, the one you went over where you were saying clear sections. It was just before we got, yeah.
So the red shaded sections are sections of the wind micrositing corridor where turbines would no longer be allowed under the current form of the mitigation. So they are within 2 miles of a documented nest. The clear are areas outside of that 2-mile buffer. So wind turbines would be allowed to be sited normally.
And green is to be
Green.
cited normally.
Yes, green are the actual currently proposed locations of turbines.
And the solar fields, like there's solar fields in the west, and that demarcated by cross lines.
Yes, they are, and they are outside of that 2-mile radius of any identified nest. The east solar array, which is not shown on this map because it was excluded for a number of mitigation reasons, would be fully within a 2-mile radius of a nest.
Can you show it with your cursor approximately where you think?
Yes, it's right. Well,
right.
it's right here mostly, actually.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments from council members?
Mr. Green, if we were to go with C, would the applicant have the option of trying to adjust where that solar station is?
Likely not for the solar array, just because there's a lot involved with the siting of project components, and the only areas where a full complement of surveys have been performed are the current crosshatch solar arrays or those corridors, the micrositing corridors. So they could identify a different site and propose that. It would require more collection of data and analysis.
Probably an amendment.
Yes.
And the reason they probably have two sets is one is connected to one side of the project and another is connected to different parts of the project. Is that correct? Infrastructure wise?
The primary transmission line does connect the eastern part of the project to the western part, but there are substations located on both sides. So I would imagine each solar array connects to different substations as currently proposed.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? We will take a vote. The vote will be whether or not the primary project components, all of them, turbines, solar arrays, and BESS, should be excluded from all areas within 2 miles of a documented ferruginous hawk nest. So we're voting on C. And all those in favor, raise hands. All those opposed? Oh, put your hands down. All those opposed? So we will be, okay, so what are we moving forward with then? Ms. Brewster.
Yeah, I guess maybe a bit more discussion about a compromise like B. I'm in favor of excluding. I guess my concern is maybe the east solar array and how it's affected, considering the discussion we had earlier about the east solar array and the habitat types. So I guess I am in favor of the 2 mile hard boundary for most things, but I think I have a question about that east solar array.
Okay. And your question on the east solar array is?
Well, I guess not so much a question as
Oh.
not I guess I am just not a I haven't had a chance to think about that East solar array and its effects and how it is affected by the 2-mile boundaries, especially around a historicness that may be demonstrated as not viable.
Okay.
So that's why I'm waffling a little bit.
Okay. Mr. Levitt?
Yeah, I guess I have a question for Mr. Green, Mr. Livingston, or other FSEC staff with expertise, but I guess I'm curious if there is a best management practice that has been in place in Washington or more widely in Western states for these specific questions, 1/2 mile or 2 miles? Like, do most states do B, do most states do C, etc.?
I would say in most existing cases, Rugen's hawk nests are not necessarily provided a buffer from development. This was proposed in this case because this species is their population levels are very fragile in this area, and there is a significant threat to their continued existence in the area, both as a result of direct mortality and loss of foraging habitat. The 2-mile buffer was arrived at through discussions with WDFW staff as an indication of the general home range of Rugen's hawks from their nest. And that was their guidance on the desired buffer that WDFW staff would like to see implemented for all project components. The option B here that FSEC staff developed as a potential option for discussion was arrived at by using the existing WDFW seasonal buffers for work activities for active Rugen's hawk nest, which is 1/2 mile, and considering a case where that 1/2 mile seasonal buffer is made permanent for all project components and no siting would be done in that area, with the remaining 1.5 mile radius of the home range being covered by the existing restrictions within the FEIS version of this measure, which is again the inactive nest, non-viable habitat, and a mitigation and monitoring and management plan.
So would an option be that we would not allow, which I think we've already done, but just to be sure, turbines to be constructed within the 2-mile documented ferruginous hawk nest? But would allow solar arrays or BESS I don't even know if that I want to go to the demonstrating that a nest is inactive, I guess.
Chair Drew, this is Sonia Bumpus. I was just going to mention, as I'm listening here, that the council talked about eliminating the red turbines, which are also turbines within this 2-mile buffer. So I wonder if maybe it makes more sense to look at this question as just about solar arrays and BESS.
Yes.
And then the other thing I was just going to mention is that I think that in the removal of the red turbines that is being contemplated, it was noted that this was about compounding impacts, getting at reducing but not able to eliminate multiple different kinds of impacts, visual, so on, avian impacts, these kinds of things. And so I don't know, I think maybe removing turbines from this and just thinking about it in terms of solar arrays and BESS, particularly if the council's leaning towards removal of the red turbines.
I think that's what exactly what I'm trying to get to here. And what would we, what is,
So I guess
Go ahead.
the version that I think you're discussing would exclude wind turbines from within a 2-mile buffer of any documented nest. And for solar arrays and BESSes, the question is whether you would like to see the existing restrictions from the FEIS version of this measure required for citing those components, or allow those components to be cited free of those restrictions.
I guess my preference would be to allow that infrastructure or that those primary project components to be included or allowed, and not I guess I guess that would be my preference. With the exclusion we've already done for the solar arrays on the priority habitat areas.
Yes, and in either of those versions I just mentioned, the mitigation management plan, I assume would stay. That's pretty
Yes.
standard for all of our species mitigation.
Yes. What are views of council members, Mr. Levitt?
I guess I think I can be persuaded, but B to me still sounds more appealing than A or C.
Say that again. It sounds more
appealing.
Oh, okay. I come back to requiring the work to be done for solar arrays or a BESS, I think is not the same as looking at the nests in the context of the impact from a turbine. So I would not have the mitigation on those two project components. So that's what I'll propose. That the species 5, we still want a mitigation plan, but the solar arrays and the BESS can be included with a species management plan. Does that make sense? Ms. Brewster?
Yeah, just so to clarify, you're leaning towards the option A, so there would be no restriction such as the half-mile seasonal buffer around a nest site. Is that correct?
Yes. Already, I mean, we can keep the exclusion of the turbines within that area, which we are also looking at another way, but I think we should also keep it in here. So it would be that the turbines would be excluded from all areas, but solar arrays and BESS would be allowed. Any discussion?
I think I would be inclined to lean towards B, that still leaves some buffer around an area that, as was discussed by the fish and wildlife expert, that the nests are generally, nest sites can be close together and used. So I feel like that would leave a little leeway without entirely excluding infrastructure there.
I could do that. Let's okay, if the applicant would want to build in that area, then they would need to demonstrate that the nest is inactive or that no viable foraging habitat is present and produce a mitigation and management plan. Okay. More discussion on that?
Now, this is Eli, Mr. Green. So we have a threshold for the applicant to be able to prove whether a nest is active or inactive, right? If it's not used for like 2 or 3 years or something, it's inactive. Is that correct? Or maybe this question's for Mike.
The exact methodology for determining whether a nest is active and whether the habitat is viable is something that would be developed through conversations with us, the applicant, WDFW, through the PTAG. The applicant has proposed a number of measures for how to reach those determinations, but we haven't really considered them at this point because we were waiting for final determination on this measure and the incorporation of the PTAG.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So this vote is on excluding turbines from all areas within 2 miles and allowing solar arrays and BESS on B. Ms. Osborne.
Sorry, Chair Drew, I just was being a little bit ahead
of the question.
Yep, sorry about that.
That's okay. So is that clear? We would exclude turbines in the 2 mile and the solar arrays and BESS would be excluded from all areas within a 1/2 mile of a documented nest, but allow the 1/2 mile to 2 miles of a documented hawk nest for solar arrays and BESS if the applicant can demonstrate that the nest is inactive, no viable foraging habitat is present, produces a mitigation plan. Okay. All those in favor, raise your hands. All those opposed? Okay. There's a 4-2, so that is moving forward.
Chair Drew, clarifying question for that vote. I thought at one
Yes.
point Director Bumpus suggested we not think about the turbines in this vote. So you did include the turbines, correct?
I did because it's, for me, a double safety, if you will. To say here they're excluded, so there's no question about that they would be excluded in the 2 mile area, but they're also ones we're planning to exclude anyway.
Okay.
I would also say, in the interest of staff actually implementing these measures, having that 2 mile buffer defined here is very helpful because we are excluding not just individual turbine locations, we are excluding sections of the micrositing corridor so that turbines aren't just moved a few feet and suddenly are allowed again.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. We'll move on to the next one.
And the next question is this same topic again, but for secondary components. I'm sorry, that's a typo. Option 3 is not the current version for this. For secondary components, the version in the FEIS is also the version that council was considering at the previous meeting, which is that secondary components such as roads, substations, and transmission lines would be allowed within 2 miles of a documented nest only when the applicant can demonstrate that the nest is inactive, no viable foraging habitat is present, and produces a mitigation and management plan.
Mr. Young.
Could you flip back to the notes from our December 20 meeting as far as the secondary components?
Did you mean like the actual text of it?
Yes.
There.
Thank you.
What the edit essentially did was change the beginning of this measure to fully exclude primary components within that 2 mile buffer, which will now change as a result of the previous vote, and then make the rest of species 5 as written only apply to secondary components. So the rest of the text is essentially the same as the FEIS version of species 5.
And that's the original that's on the left is the FEIS version, which would, so maybe to make this easy for everyone, it is the same as the FEIS version. All those in favor of maintaining that, and as we described on 12/20/23, raise your hand. I'll ask for discussion. Is there any other discussion?
Yeah,
I
could we
shouldn't-
flip back to the questions? I'm still trying to cross-reference the questions back to
Yeah.
the notes.
My apologies.
So this is for secondary components.
Correct.
And is it that option A is what is consistent with both the FEIS and December 20?
Yes.
Correct.
And that's what the vote is being called for, is who supports
Yes.
A
Yes.
because of that consistency?
Yes.
Is that correct? Thanks for the clarification.
Yep. So we're going to vote on A. All those in favor of A, unless there's further discussion. Sorry. Okay. All those in favor of A, raise your hand. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. The next and I believe final exclusion measure for today's meeting is a new measure that we titled Cultural Resources 3, which is a desire that was discussed by the council at the previous meeting to eliminate or exclude all project components from areas east of the boundaries of Straub Canyon to reduce the project impacts to identify TCPs. And this is what the project would look like with Straub Canyon doesn't fully bisect the project area, so staff drew a line in the direction of travel of the canyon from its final extent and kind of extended that through the project area so that we would have a line of demarcation. But what the project would look like with the incorporation of that measure. And then the question is fairly straightforward. It's just, should all project components be allowed east of Straub Canyon, which is the FEIS version, or excluded from areas east of Straub Canyon, which is the proposed version?
Mr. Young.
Seth, could you flip back to the map? I had a question about down at the extreme southeast tip of the project area here. There's like a red shaded corridor. Is that an area where we've already, for other reasons, excluded turbines?
You mean this area here?
Nope. Up near like what the new project area would be. Right up there.
Okay. Yes, I'm sorry. Just the way that we develop these figures, these red shaded corridors are areas that are within 2 miles of a Perugia's hawk nest, so they would be excluded by species 5 for primary project components.
Thank you. And I do advocate for this option. I think we would eliminate a large portion of the unmitigable high impacts to traditional cultural properties, and so much of what is in the area that would be eliminated under this option would also resolve multiple other concerns that we've had with ferruginous hawk, with wildlife movement corridors, with visual impacts from the more developed areas off to the east, with connectivity, so many things. But the dominant driver for this for me is to address the significant unmitigable impacts to traditional cultural properties, and I do support this.
Okay, thank you. Other comments?
This is Eli. I guess I would offer up that, we've done our best as a council to mitigate environmental impacts, especially wildlife, and the cultural impacts are challenging to say the least, but because we've had such a strong focus on wildlife, I think that actually ends up helping with, just saying at a very high level, helping with TCP issues presented by some interested parties. So, I don't know, the demarcation of Stroud Canyon to me seems arbitrary or pulled out of our pockets. So I guess I can't support the proposal as is.
Thank you. Other comments? I will say that I respect and understand, Mr. Young, your reason for putting this forward. I would say that there are project components in areas to the east that don't have the same multiple compounding impacts as the ones we talked about earlier, and those would be eliminated in this proposal. And I do know and understand that the entire project does impact traditional cultural properties, and we are considering that information along with the environmental, but we also have to consider our responsibility to support clean energy development as well. And it's a difficult balancing to do, but in order to maintain ability for more of the project to move forward for that clean energy, I would not support eliminating all of the project to the east. Mr. Livingston.
Yeah, I always end up having more questions than I have answers, but it would be helpful for me to know what would the project's ability to, how much megawatts can they produce with this proposal? How many turbines are we talking that would be built? What's the, what does that look like? I mean, it is a very different project than what was originally proposed. And we also have all the other mitigation and avoidance measures that we've taken have changed the project significantly anyway. I want to support this effort because it's a large project with 2 solar arrays and a number of turbines in the string. I also know that the company designed it to include that in giant 25-mile long corridor, which there's multiple issues with that, of course. But seeing what the output of this, and truly, is it not viable? Yeah, it's not viable to what they built or originally designed for, but could this be a project in itself? I believe it could. So I'm supportive of it.
Okay, thank you. Other council members?
Sorry, Chair Drew, I didn't raise my hand, but I would refer my fellow council members to the confidential mapping of the project's impacts on traditional cultural properties. Again, everything we've been looking at so far has been based on the maps that where TCP impacts do not feature into the green, yellow, red categorization of the turbines. And you get a different take on the project's impacts when you look at that confidential information of the project's impacts on TCPs. And I'd also put forth that I don't think the selection of Straub Canyon was a completely arbitrary thing. If we start looking at maps that represent our other concerns that we have talked about and that we're mitigating, particularly where that major north-south wildlife movement corridor runs through the project, Straub Canyon and what's east of that, it is a logical breakpoint to eliminate a lot of impacts associated with the eastern part of the project. So I just put forth that it was not an arbitrary selection.
Thank you. Thank you for also mentioning the confidential maps. I myself personally have spent a great deal of time looking at those maps. So I appreciate you referencing those. I have considered that. I have looked at the multiple impacts and the balance that I am trying to make with this project. And we will not eliminate all the impacts to traditional cultural properties unless we deny the project. So I will not be supporting this. I think there are still elements that can be constructed with a lot of the mitigation that we brought forward for many impacts that we have seen in each of our processes, again, with the FEIS, with the adjudication, and with public comments. I think we will need to take a vote. All those in favor of supporting this proposal to eliminate all project elements from east of Straub Canyon, please raise your hand. Thank you. All those opposed? Okay, it fails. Thank you. Are there other measures for us to consider?
No, that is the entirety.
Okay. So, Mr. Young.
I don't know how it would fit exactly into the force of our discussion this afternoon, but I think what was summarized for us at the beginning of the meeting, the additional input around impacts on aerial firefighting capabilities that came in from Mr. Lane and Chief, the local fire chief. I think that might point to some things that we would want to require of the applicant to, if the project moves ahead, that knowing that aerial firefighting will not be able to be used inside the perimeter or within a quarter mile of the perimeter, it suggests that really serious consideration is given to the alternative and some type of really well thought out plan on how fires can be fought from the ground in those areas that are not open to aircraft.
I think it is. I think that's a good idea. I think we already have a measure on that, don't we?
We don't have a mitigation measure, but one of the applicant commitments is to develop a fire management plan in coordination with FSEC and local fire response agencies.
But perhaps what could be included in there is that the applicant needs to specifically address how it's going to make up for the lack of ability to fight fire from the air, which is an extreme, probably the single most important initial attack tool that we have. And so I think there's an added responsibility on the applicant to make sure that that plan addresses how they're going to make up for the inability to call for aircraft when aircraft would otherwise be deployed.
It's my understanding, and maybe the staff can help me here, that there isn't a wind farm. There's not an expectation that there will be firefighting, aerial firefighting over any wind farm in the state. So my concern has always been about the periphery. I think if you look even at the Wild Horse Wind Project and their experience with fire and how they fought it there, which is in their TAC minutes, which was just provided to us. So I hear what you're saying. My concern has always been on the aerial firefighting is the area outside the perimeter of the project itself.
Yeah, I think the conversation, I agree with you, Chair Drew, but I think the conversations we've had around aerial firefighting as it pertains to this project have highlighted some things that maybe haven't got the same level of attention in the past. And in fact, I believe that there's a bill working in the legislature right now that addresses aerial firefighting and wind interactions. And I don't know what the status of that bill is, but I think what we've done in the context of discussing it in this project, we've highlighted something that maybe going forward needs a little more attention than what it's received in the past. But I would agree that the challenges around aerial firefighting and this proposed wind farm exist with other wind farms as well.
Yeah, I think the fire, I think we should ask, I think we can certainly ask that the plan consider issues around aerial firefighting.
If air assets were at one's disposal, one might write the plan one way, but knowing going in that aerial firefighting is not an option would cause you to write the plan a different way.
Right, that's fine. I think that's fine. Appreciate that. So the conclusion here is that we need a motion to ask staff to finalize documents. This is to give direction to staff to finalize documents for review by the public and by ourselves that incorporate the decisions we have made today and to provide those documents back to us for review and final consideration at a future meeting. Is there a motion to direct staff? Mr. Young.
I'm sorry, could I ask a question
Sure.
before we get to that? So is there still a final vote in front of us as to whether we support this project being built or not?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So this is directing the staff to move forward with the documents with the decisions we've made today and prior decisions to finalize those documents for our review and final vote in a future meeting. May I have a motion?
Eli Levitt, so moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Stacy Brewster, second.
Okay. Oh, go ahead. Was that somebody from our council? Okay. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, let's do that raise hand. Okay. Opposed? We better put our hands down. There we go. Motion carries. One more item on, well, actually a couple more items on our agenda. One is an action item regarding an extension request. Ms. Moon, are you still here?
Yep. Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair Drew.
You are on for the extension request.
Okay, so I want to turn the council's attention to the current agreement between FSEC and the project proponent to complete the processing of their application for site certification or ASC and submit an FSEC recommendation to the governor by January 31st of this year, 2024. To allow for more council review, including responding to the council's requests for additional information, FSEC staff worked with the applicant to establish an updated commitment date to complete the processing of the Horse Heaven application for site certification. The new date, which is referred to as the extension date as defined in the revised Code of Washington 80.50.100, 80, 50, 100, requires the FSEC Council to report to the governor its recommendations as to the approval or rejection of an application for certification within 12 months of receipt by the council of such an application or such later time as is mutually agreed by the council and the applicant. 3 extension requests have been approved by the council, and the extension request included in the council packet, which is up on the screen, that's included today would extend the application processing of the proposed Horse Heaven Wind Farm project application for site certification to April 30th, 2024. 5 public comments were received on the extension request. The proposed extension request will the proposed extension request will allow the additional time needed for staff to prepare the documentation needed for the recommendation to the governor, followed by council review and public comment. Staff have coordinated with the applicant on the request timeframe to allow for work that may be needed following council review or public comment.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Is there a motion to approve the extension request till April? Sorry, my eyes can't see. Is it
April 30th, 2024.
2024? A motion to approve the extension request?
Stacy Brewster, so moved.
Thank you. Second?
Eli Levitz, second.
Thank you. Discussion? My discussion is that I appreciate the time. I expect it will be done sooner than that, but I don't see any point in continuing to ask for extensions, so I appreciate the time frame in this letter. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We have agenda items remaining, and thank you everybody for the discussion, the thoughtful consideration. I very much appreciate it. Cascade Renewable Transmission Project pre-application announcement. Ms. Hofmeyer.
Thank you. I'll try and keep it brief. On December 20th, 2023, FSEC staff received the pre-application materials for the Cascade Renewable Transmission Project. The proposed transmission line would begin at the Big Eddy substation located near the Dalles, Oregon, and terminate at the Portland General Electric Harborton substation located in Portland, Oregon. This line would primarily run down the Columbia River in the riverbed, exiting the river to go around the Bonneville Dam. Per the revised Code of Washington, or RCW 80.50.330, and the Washington Administrative Code, or WAC 463-61-050, electrical transmission proposals are required to engage in specific pre-application activities, such as outreach and negotiations with local jurisdictions. While the applicant, Cascade Renewables LLC, is engaging in those activities, FSEC staff are preparing to hold public informational meetings in accordance with WAC 463-61-040. Staff are preparing to hold 3 meetings, one in each county the proposed transmission line passes by, on the evenings of February 6th, 7th, and 8th. At these meetings, staff will present the FSEC process and the applicant will present the project. These are not meetings to take public comment, but information on how to contact FSEC with comment will be provided as part of FSEC's presentation. Details for the in-person venues of these meetings will be issued once they are finalized. Are there any questions?
So this is a pre-application process which is required in our statute on transmission projects. Should this project come to us in a application, not in pre-application, then the council would be required to hold public informational meetings within 60 days in these same communities. Is that correct?
Correct. Once the application is received, the process proceeds as it would for an energy generating facility. There are specific pre-application facility or pre-application activities that are required of transmission only. But once the application is received, the meetings that are typically required for other projects will also be required of this project.
So this is an early meeting at this point in time to inform the public about both the project from the entity that is putting it forward, as well as to hear about the FSEC process. But we will have our usual public informational meetings, taking comments after the application is received.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions from council members? Okay, thank you. Third quarter cost allocation, Ms. Bumpus.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew and Council. Thank you. For the record, this is Sonia Bumpus. I'm going to read off FSEC's third quarter 2024 cost allocations. This covers the period January 1, 2024 to March 30th, 2024. For Kittitas Valley Wind Power, 4%. For Wild Horse, 4%. For Columbia Generating Station, 20%. Columbia Solar, 4%. WNP 1, 2%. Whistling Ridge, 3%. Grays Harbor, 6%. Chehalis, 6%. Desert Claim, 4%. Goose Prairie, 4%. Horse Heaven, 15%. Badger Mountain, 6%. Cypress Creek, 4%. Watoma Solar, 6%. Hop Hill, 6%. Carriger Solar, also 6%. And that concludes my update for the non-direct cost allocation.
Thank you. And now for the employee updates, we have new employee introductions. Beautiful picture on the screen. And I don't know who that was, Ms. Grantham. Mr. Walker, you have an introduction to make.
Yes, thank you, Chair Drew. For the record, Dave Walker, Director of Administrative Services with FSEC. I would like to introduce our new Policy and Legislation Manager. Lisa McLean just started with us the middle of January as our new legislative manager. Very happy to have her aboard. She joins us from the Gambling Commission. So Lisa, if you'd like to say a few words.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute these things. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet everybody. We're nice to participate in this meeting for the first time. I am the Legislative and Policy Manager and did come over from the Gambling Commission, where I was also the Legislative and Policy Manager. I've been working for Washington State for state government for 5 years. Before the Gambling Commission, I was working with the Redistricting Commission. And before that, I was working with census and making sure everybody filled out their census form. And for that reason, Washington State was second in the nation in terms of people who self-responded. So I'm happy to be here and look forward to trying to advance the interests of the council through the legislation and policy efforts that we pursue. So nice to meet everybody.
Thank you. Welcome aboard. Next, we have Amy Hofkemeyer.
Thank you, Chair Drew. I would like to introduce two new siting specialists to the council who have both started this month. We have Zia Ahmed, who is joining us from most recently Missouri. And then we have Maria Belkina, who is also a siting specialist, joining us. Maria will be taking the Cascade Renewable Transmission Project that I just introduced, and Zia will be taking at least one, if not more, of the incoming projects that we're projecting to see in the coming weeks.
Thank you. Welcome aboard. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Would you like, I mean, would you like to introduce a little bit about yourself? Go ahead. Maria?
Yeah, of course.
Zia.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Zia Ahmed. So I just complete my PhD from Mississippi State University. My concentration was Earth and Atmospheric Science, and I just start for AppSec from January 2nd, 2024. And I'm excited to work for further, and nice to meet you, everyone. And thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Belkina?
Hello, everyone. I just started my FS experience since January 2024. I already have some experience with transmission lines, and I'm very pleased to be part of the team. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome aboard. Ms. Owens? You
Thank
also
you.
have a new employee to introduce?
I do. Thank you. Good afternoon, FSEC Council and staff. I'd like to introduce another new employee, Adrienne Barker. Adrienne joins the FSEC team as an administrative assistant. Mostly her work will be focused on assisting the PEIS manager once we get that position filled, and other office support tasks as needed. Adrienne recently relocated back to Washington from Virginia, where she was an office manager for a financial planning company. As a former Washington State employee, Adrienne's extensive admin experience includes working in event planning, as well as private sector and government contracting in the Washington, D.C. area. So welcome to the team, Adrienne.
Thank you. Go ahead. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to meet everybody. I'm looking forward to it.
Welcome aboard, and we appreciate, and welcome home, maybe.
Yes,
Well,
thank you.
Come back. So
Yep,
thank you.
you.
With that, we have no further business. And so thank you all for your participation and work throughout. And this meeting is adjourned.